Okay, so we mentioned in our last video that there are four different game plans you can use to try and win, and we are going to look at um, one of them in particular each week for the next 4 weeks. We looked last week at the first of the game plans, which is racing, simply trying to get your checkers around the board faster than your opponent. And tonight's lesson, we looked at priming, which I'm going to explain about now. Basically, to build a prime is a blockade. It's a long wall of checkers that your opponent will struggle to get past. The longer the wall is, the harder it is to get past it. And you're basically you're trapping your checkers in behind that wall. So if you look, I've set this up the way we usually do. So we're white and we're bearing in on our home board is the bottom right hand quadrant. We're bearing into the bottom right. And if you look in that quadrant, the two black checkers that are there are our opponent's checkers, and they're trying to escape. And what we're trying to do is to block them in with a bit of a wall of sorts. So at the moment, it's quite easy for them. If they could, there's plenty of numbers they can roll to start moving their black checkers round and escape from our home board. But if we had a slightly different formation, we start to get in a position where it's getting a little bit trickier for them to escape, and we can. That's a sort of a bit of a blockade. We can make it stronger. We now have 4 points in a row, and we call that a prime. And that particular position there is called a four prime because we've got 4 points in a row in that blockade. Um, we can strengthen it further if you like, and by blocking them in further. Technically speaking, that's called a broken six prime. You don't need to worry about that. We could call that that's even stronger. And we call that a five prime. And I suppose the um, absolutely deluxe version of a prime, the one we really want to get, is a six prime. And I was saying in the live lesson today that the six prime is like the warm, fluffy comfort blanket of backgammon, because no matter what your opponent does, they can move right up to the six prime, but they can never escape. You cannot roll a seven on a dice, so therefore you're not getting past that prime. They're blocked in, and they can hit our checkers. They can hit us millions of times. Doesn't matter. They're stuck in till we get around and we decide to break that prime. So a six prime is the really kind of ultimate in backgammon satisfaction, because you have your opponents blocked in. Now a little bit on how we can build a prime, and this gives a great chance for me to introduce you to a little bit of backgammon lingo and also some backgammon mathematics, very low-key mathematics. So some of the lingo, there's a word we use in backgammon, slotting, and let me give you an example. So when you roll a 2-1 at the start, the best thing you can do with the 2 is probably take on the top left, take that big pile of 5 white checkers we have there and bringing one of them down into play. And often when you start, bringing one down and then splitting your back 2 checkers is a good thing to do. And that's, probably the best move you can do with a 2-1. But there's another very attractive move. If I put that checker back on the 2 checkers, our rearmost checkers back together, really strong players very often prefer to do something else with the 1. If you look at the bottom right quadrant in the pile of 5 checkers we have there, and they bring one down, that's called slotting. They're slotting a point. They're going to try and make that point. Now, our opponent could roll a 4. We're sent back to the start. But look, if they hit us back and we go back to start, there's all that space up there on their home board. We're coming out. It's not fatal by any means. But if they don't roll a 4, well then if we roll a 1 or a 3 or a 6 or double 4s or double 2s in the next go, that's 29 out of 36 possible rolls. We make our that point and we start building our prime. And it's a very strong, if you're a confident player, and usually if you're playing against a player that you think is slightly weaker than you, you would tend to play that move, the 2-1 in that way. And it's the verb is we slot that point with a view to making a point later on. Another word we use is builders, and let me give you an example of that. So we open with a 4-3, and we can bring 2 down from our 13 point, the big stack of checkers on the top left. A little bit vulnerable. Our opponent might roll an 8 or a 9 and hit us, and we take our chances in that. But again, if they do, it's not fatal. That we'll easily get back in. But effectively, what we're doing, we're talking about primes being like a long wall of checkers, but we've started putting bricks into that wall, and that's why they're called. We're builders. They're building blocks of our prime that we're bringing down, and we can use those. We can cover those checkers, or we can use them to make points in our home board, and it's a really good way to be. And the great thing is, they give us flexibility, and a concept we'll later on we'll be looking at key backgammon concepts, and one of the key concepts is flexibility. Um, that whatever you roll next go can give you good numbers, and what we're trying to do, I've used that phrase already, but just to emphasize it, another bit of backgammon lingo, making a point simply means that you get a point and you have two of your checkers on it. So you find a new point that ends up with two of your checkers and you've made that point. And if I talk about making a point, that's what I mean. So if you look at this, the position we're in, it's very flexible. We so many good numbers that we can roll, combinations of numbers we can roll the next go, that can be very helpful. So at the very start, if you look down the bottom of the board, we're white again. We've got two piles of checkers there, one with 3 and one with 5. They're two. I think you can see it. They're 2 pips apart. So if we roll dice that are 2 pips apart, like say a 6-4, we can use we look at the checkers that are 2 pips apart and see, well, what can we do with it. So we can, with typically with a 6 and 4, we can move one checker forward 6, the other checker forward 4, and we've made a point in our opponent's home board. So I'm going to get you to test yourself on this. Let's take this situation. How would you play a 3-1, bearing in mind that the dice roll you have, the 3 and the 1 are 2 apart? So you can pause the video, and assuming you've now unpaused the video, uh, you might know that 3-1 is probably the best for priming, the best opening roll we can get, so that we can bring, if you look at again the two piles of checkers at the bottom for white are 2 apart, the numbers are 2 apart, so we bring one in with the 3, one down with the 1, and we've made it our golden point. If you remember from last week, we called that the golden point. It's an ideal one for making. um, and just one thing, just a personal thing, I always feel if you can move something from your 13 point to your 9 point, it leaves a particularly flexible position. I'll show you what I mean. 5-4 is an opening roll. If you look at the top left, the best way to play the 5, it's only one safe way, is to bring a checker down with the 5. But what do we do with the 4? That idea of splitting at the back checkers, that's a good use of the 4. And to be honest, that's what I normally would play with the 4. But instead, we could play another checker down from the middle, from the top left. I call that the middle because it's your checkers are nearly halfway around there. Bring that down, and the real attraction of this is, look at this position here. The checker we've brought down and the pile beside it are 1 pip apart. The two big stacks that we always start with are 2 pips apart. The checker we brought down and the other pile at the bottom in our home board, they're 3 pips apart. The checker we've brought down and the pile we brought it down from are 4 pips apart. And even we've got the the pile of 3 at the top now are white, 3 white checkers on the top, and the one with 4 on the bottom left, they're 5 pips apart. So we've got the real attraction of this position is whether you're 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 pips apart, whatever you roll with the dice is going to work. So let me give you an example. We roll another 5-4. Well, as I said, if you look, the checker that's on its own, the bottom left, and the pile of 4 beside it, they're 1 apart. The dice are 1 apart. So you combine those two checkers, those two piles of checkers, you bring one in with the 5, the other one down with the 4, and we've made a really good point. Our 4 point is such a our opponent's 4 point is such a good thing to make. Our 4 point is such a good place to make. So it's test yourself again time. How would you play a 4-3 on that basis? And you can pause, and assuming you've unpaused, well, again, the dice are one apart. So we look where on the board we have checkers that are one apart, and it's in the bottom left quadrant again. So we can bring one of them in with the 4, the one beside it in with the 3, and they've made a point. And again, they've made our golden point, which is such a good one to have. If we have checkers that are 4 apart, 6 and 2 are 4 apart, we'll look at the top left, we move that fella down, four away from that pile is the other lone checker on the bottom, so it lets us make a point, and that's a good blocking point to have. It's not the best, you're a little bit inflexible for making primes, but it's still a very good block for our opponent. That's what our bar point, a good one to make. If slightly weaker, if we have 3 apart in this situation, well, if you look at the lone checker on the bottom left quadrant and look where the big pile of our checkers in the bottom right, they're 3 apart. So we combine them because the dice are 3 apart, and we can move them in. It's a little bit far advanced, but it's the best we can do with those positions, and we have made a point in our home board. So that's it. That's your kind of first introduction to priming. But I just want to give you we were talking in the class tonight about this. In terms of the homework, and just enjoy the game. Some people were worrying that they haven't, watched enough videos or read enough books. And I have to admit, I found this lesson in priming has been the toughest lesson I've done so far, because there's so much more to priming. There's how we can use a prime and what we should be doing when we've made a prime. There's a whole lesson in how if our opponent has a prime, how we defend against it. So I will, at some stage in the future, I'll do a second video on more about primes. But for now, we were chatting about, for beginners, enjoy playing the game. You now know what a prime is. You now know the idea of trying to build a blockade, and the longer the blockade and the fewer gaps in the blockade, the better. You know it's called a prime, and you know it's a really, really effective tactic, because if you're playing a game, and you get a prime, you're suddenly a strong. If you get a 4 prime or more, and you have opponent's checkers blocked in, you become a favorite. And at 5 prime, you're a strong favorite. 6 prime, you're very likely to win the game. So the message we finished with in the class this evening was just enjoy the game. Don't beat yourself up that you have to read every book on backgammon by next Christmas. Don't worry about watching every single video online. There's great videos online on YouTube. There's great books out there, and if you get into it, you might start trying to read the odd book or two. But for now, just play against the computer, play against your friends, and enjoy the game. And that is your homework for this week.